My name is Maya. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Chicago, Illinois. I've always known I was different, both in appearance and the way people saw me. Growing up, I was told that I wouldn't amount to much. People said I was too skinny, too frail, too dark-skinned, too other. My appearance became the thing people used to dismiss me. They didn't see the person behind the looks, the one who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure things went smoothly. At this particular family gathering, I should have expected the usual judgments, whispers, and the uncomfortable silence when I entered a room. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just the subtle looks or the backhanded comments. This time, it was a label, an accusation, pinned directly on me. As I walked in, one of my cousins, who had always been the loudest of them all, approached me and slapped a lazy badge onto my chest. I froze. For a moment, everything around me blurred, and I couldn't breathe. I looked at the badge in disbelief. It was just a small piece of plastic, but it might as well have been a branding iron. It stung more than any comment I'd ever heard. It wasn't even a real accusation. Not really. They didn't understand that while they lived their lives, I was the one paying bills, keeping the business afloat, doing the work that no one else saw. I had been doing it for years, quietly, and without asking for recognition. I didn't say anything, though. I had learned long ago that speaking up only made things worse. My family, with all their superficial expectations, would never understand the work I put in. They only saw the exterior, the woman with the pimpled, freckled skin and the sloping shoulders that had been called weak my whole life. They couldn't see the power in those small, hidden sacrifices, the late nights, the hustle that didn't fit into the traditional ideas of success. To them, I was just different. I didn't match the stereotype of the successful woman they expected me to be. They couldn't see beyond the skin. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. People chuckled at the badge, thinking it was just a joke, just some harmless fun. But I felt the weight of it. I felt the eyes on me, the whispers, the stares that followed, every move I made. All those years of helping, of quietly providing for my family without asking for anything in return, now reduced to a label. A joke, a badge that said everything they thought I was. Lazy. It was crushing. But I wasn't about to let it break me. Not today. I wasn't going to show them how deeply it hurt. So I smiled. An empty smile. The kind that hides the pain inside. I didn't want them to see how badly it stung. I stood there, surrounded by laughter and idle chatter, but inside, I was boiling. It wasn't the badge that made me angry. It was the years of being ignored, dismissed, and underestimated that made me furious. It was the unspoken assumption that I wasn't capable, that I was just another lazy person who didn't deserve recognition. As I stood there, holding back tears, I knew something had to change. This couldn't be the life I was destined for. Quietly, working in the background, never seen for who I truly was. It was time for a shift. The world would see me differently soon. Not as the lazy woman who couldn't possibly be successful, but as someone who held the reins, who had quietly been pulling the strings all along. They wouldn't get to dismiss me anymore. I held my head high and turned to the group, determined to shake off their words. The night wasn't over yet, and neither was my story. This was just the beginning. The rest of the evening blurred by as I stood, frozen, watching the rest of my family go on about their business. The badge still pinned to my chest felt like an anchor, holding me back from being who I knew I was. The laughter around me, the casual jabs, the way they all assumed so much about me. It was all too much. They looked at me, seeing only what they expected. The quiet, shy woman with no ambition, the one who always blended into the background. The one who could never live up to their standards of success. But that wasn't who I was. I had spent years making sure they never saw the truth. I was the one keeping it all together. The family's finances, the business they couldn't manage on their own, the bills they could never pay without my help. I was the unseen force, working day and night. I was the one who ensured their comfort. Yet all they ever saw was my difference, my too thin figure, my dark skin that they didn't know how to embrace, my lack of a successful persona that could fit their mold. I wasn't the polished, confident woman they expected to see. I wasn't a lawyer or a doctor or someone with a title or degree. No, I was the one who was just there, quietly working away in the background, never asking for anything. The worst part, they never noticed. The expectations they had for me were suffocating. There was this belief that I couldn't be anything more than what I appeared to be. This fragile, soft-spoken woman who didn't fit their ideals of what a successful person should look like. They didn't understand that success wasn't about appearances or fitting into a mold. It wasn't about looking like someone who had it all together. Success was about results, about action. But they didn't see that. They only saw me as the odd one out, the unusual sister who didn't fit into their neat little box. But I didn't care. Or at least, I didn't want to care. The more they dismissed me, the more I realized how much power I had, even if they couldn't see it. I had been doing everything for them, making sacrifices left and right. And yet, I was the one they considered a failure. I had spent too many years walking on eggshells, trying to be the person they wanted me to be, trying to live up to their expectations. And for what? To be branded as lazy, weak, incapable of standing up for myself? No. This wasn't how it was going to end. They could call me lazy all they wanted, but I knew my worth. I had earned every cent, every ounce of success I had. I had funded their dreams while they laughed at mine. But that was going to change. No more. I was done with being the invisible woman in their eyes. I was going to take control of my life, and I was going to make them see me for who I really was. Not just the woman they thought they knew, but the woman who had worked tirelessly to make sure their lives were comfortable. As the night wore on, I stayed quiet, pretending to be content with my place at the table. They didn't know I was already planning my next move. My eyes kept darting to the corner of the room, where the family business contracts were displayed. I had always had the power. They just hadn't realized it yet. And when they did, they wouldn't know how to handle it. They thought I was just the quiet one, the one with no voice, the one they could dismiss and ignore. But it was time to flip the script. Time to show them that the person they had underestimated was the one who was about to change everything. As I walked out of that room, I felt something shift inside me. It was no longer about just surviving in their world. It was about taking back what was mine. It was about proving to them that success didn't look like what they expected. It looked like me, silent, strong, and ready to take the reins. The following week, I kept to myself. I stayed in my apartment, focusing on the work that had been piling up while I had been distracted by everything that had happened. I didn't go out much, didn't make any calls to family. I was tired. Not just physically tired, but emotionally drained in a way I hadn't realized until I stepped back and started to process everything, the weight of it all. The years of quiet sacrifice, the constant giving, the unacknowledged work, was like a weight on my chest. I felt suffocated by it, trapped in a cycle of constantly putting everyone else's needs before my own. But even in the silence, I couldn't escape the thoughts of what had happened. That night, at the family gathering, the words that had been thrown at me, the lazy badge, the casual dismissals, kept replaying in my mind, like a broken record. And while it hurt, while it stung deeply, something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't furious at them. I was more disappointed in myself for allowing it to go on for so long. I had let them think I was just the quiet one, the one who was always there to pick up the slack. I had let them ignore the fact that I was the one holding everything together, that I had been supporting their dreams while they barely noticed mine. Then, on the 5th day after the gathering, I got a call. It was from an old friend of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had known me before all of this, before I became the silent, invisible woman behind the scenes. His voice on the other end of the phone was warm, familiar, and it immediately put me at ease. "Maya, I've been hearing things," he said. "And I just want to say, I'm proud of you. I always knew you had it in you." I blinked, surprised by the sudden rush of emotion that surged through me. I hadn't expected this, not from him. He had been a part of my past, a part of the life I'd left behind when I moved away and started taking care of everyone else. But his words, his recognition, hit me in a way that no one else has ever had. "I saw the way you were with your family," he continued. "How you've supported them. How you've been the one holding everything up. They don't see it, Maya, but I do. You've been more than they've ever given you credit for. And you know what? You're a boss. You always were. You just need to realize it." I felt the breath leave my body. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like I was just a cog in the wheel, doing the work that no one else would do. I felt seen. I felt recognized. His words echoed in my mind, replaying over and over again. "You're a boss." They were simple words, but they meant more to me than anything else anyone had ever said. Because in that moment, I realized something I had never allowed myself to acknowledge before. I wasn't just the person who quietly worked in the background. I was the one who had made it all happen. I had built things. I had created success, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. I had been the one pulling the strings, making things happen. I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not the forced smile I'd been wearing. For years, not the one that hid all the hurt, but a real smile. A smile that came from a place of understanding, from the realization that I had been underestimating myself all along. In that moment, I knew it was time for change. I couldn't keep playing the background role anymore. I couldn't keep being the silent worker, the invisible helper. I had to take control of my own story. I had to show them that I was more than they ever thought I was. I was not lazy, I was not weak, and I wasn't going to be dismissed any longer. That night, I sat down and made a decision. I was going to take charge of my life. I was going to make sure that I was recognized for the work I had done, for the sacrifices I had made, and for the strength I had carried for so long. I was going to stop hiding. It was time to step into the spotlight, to show them all who I really was. The next day, I reached out to a few key people in the family business. I started making calls, setting things in motion. The plans I had quietly been putting in place for months were finally going to see the light of day. I was going to take the reins, and I was going to make sure that my role was recognized. When the time came, they would understand. They would realize that it wasn't just their business I had been helping with. It was my own success that had been quietly intertwined with theirs. I wasn't the invisible one anymore. I was the one in control. And when they saw it, when they finally realized everything I had done, it would be too late to turn back. The silence hung heavy in the air as I sat back down at the table. I didn't say a word. I just let the tension swirl around me. They didn't know it yet, but I was no longer the invisible woman they could dismiss so easily. No longer the quiet, passive person they thought they knew. The lazy label they had slapped on me, the one that had been worn like a badge of shame, was just another mark I had to carry. But unlike them, I knew how to carry it. I had been carrying it for years, even when no one saw the weight. As the night went on, I kept my eyes trained on them, watching their laughter, watching them joke and poke fun at each other as if they hadn't just told me I was worthless. They were too caught up in their own little world to see what was right in front of them. The truth that I had been quietly supporting them for years, carrying them without a single thank you. Every penny, every favor, every sacrifice had been unnoticed, unappreciated. But it was my silence that had always been my strength. The world had underestimated me, not just because of my appearance, because of my skin, because of my thin build, because of the way I didn't fit their idea of what success should look like, but because I had learned long ago that silence could be louder than words. It could break through the noise, cut through the expectations, and make them listen when the time was right. I knew what they thought of me. I knew that they saw my appearance as a reason to belittle me. The small blemishes on my skin, the way my figure didn't conform to their idea of beauty, made me an easy target. It was easier for them to disregard me, to keep me in the background, to think I couldn't possibly be capable of anything meaningful. But they didn't know that beneath the surface, I was stronger than any of them could imagine. I had never been one to shout or demand attention. That was never my style. Instead, I made my presence felt in ways they couldn't comprehend. I built things quietly, worked in the shadows, and ensured that their lives were comfortable. All while they never once looked my way. I was the one who kept things running smoothly, the one who funded their dreams, while they were too focused on their own petty drama to notice. And yet, when I needed something, when I needed them to see me, really see me, they only saw the label. The lazy label that had been forced upon me. The worst part wasn't the label itself. It wasn't the insults or the dismissals. It was the fact that I had allowed it for so long. I had allowed them to define me, to tell me who I was, to make me feel small. For years, I had swallowed my pride, hidden my accomplishments, and stayed in the background, always putting them first. But the truth was, I had been suffocating under the weight of their expectations and their ignorance. They didn't know what it felt like to work day and night for a family that didn't appreciate it. They didn't know what it felt like to be the one who kept everything running smoothly, only to be pushed aside and told I was doing nothing. And now, I was tired. Tired of hiding in the shadows. Tired of letting them think they knew me. It was time to change that. When I finally stood up from the table, I didn't speak a word. I didn't need to. They would see it soon enough. I would show them, not with words, but with actions, that I was no longer the quiet, invisible person they had always counted on. I had spent too long being their crutch, their background noise. It was time to take the reins, to show them that I was not just someone who existed to support them. I was the one who had built everything they took for granted. As I left the family gathering that night, I felt a shift. I wasn't the weak, unnoticed woman they thought I was. I was the one in control, the one with the power. And I wasn't going to hide it anymore. No more silence. No more playing by their rules. It was my time to shine. It's strange how the effort you put in can go unnoticed, how you can give everything to people and still be invisible. I've always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, never asking for recognition, never demanding attention. That's what they wanted from me, what they expected. They wanted me to be the invisible hand behind their success, the one who made sure everything was running smoothly, but never to be seen. It wasn't just the money, the bank transfers that I quietly handled, or the bills I paid when they couldn't. It wasn't just the hours I spent making sure the family business stayed afloat, the quiet evenings I sacrificed to do paperwork or solve problems that no one even noticed. It was Everything. The emotional labor, the sacrifices I made that no one else saw. The nights when I stayed up late, worrying about everyone else, making sure their lives were on track, while mine slipped away in the background. The family never noticed that the foundation they stood on was built by me, brick by brick, with no acknowledgement, no thanks. It was all taken for granted. But even as they ignored me, I kept going. I didn't expect anything in return. I never had. I thought that maybe, just maybe, they would notice someday. I thought if I just kept doing what I was doing, they would see how much I was sacrificing, how much I was giving for them, without ever asking for anything. But that day, when I walked into that family gathering and was slapped with the lazy badge, everything changed. That was when I realized that my efforts, the silent work, the invisible sacrifices, had been wasted. They didn't see it, and they never would. It wasn't just about the business or the money. It was the way I had spent years making myself invisible, pushing my own needs aside to cater to theirs. No one ever asked me if I was okay. No one ever noticed that I was exhausted. I was expected to be the reliable one, the one who could handle it all. But no one ever thought to check in on me. No one thought to ask if I needed help, if I needed support. I became the constant, the background noise, the one who just kept giving. I became the invisible force that kept everything together, and in the process, I lost myself. But that night, when the label was put on me, when I realized how little they saw of the work I had put in, something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger that I felt at first. It was more like a numbness, a realization that I had been living for everyone else and had completely forgotten about myself. I had given everything, and yet they couldn't even see the effort. The worst part was that I had allowed it to happen. I had allowed myself to become this person, the one who existed solely for the benefit of others. I had become so wrapped up in making sure everyone else was okay that I had forgotten to take care of myself. And now, here I was, standing in front of a family who didn't even see me, who thought I was lazy, who thought I hadn't done anything. I thought about all the nights I stayed awake, making sure they had everything they needed. All the times I put my own life on hold to help them, and I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that I had given so much, sacrificed so much, and never once had they asked me if I was okay. They just assumed I would always be there, and for so long, I had let them. But no more. I was done being the invisible one, done being the one who quietly carried all their burdens while they never thought twice about me. I had given up so much of myself for them, but I wasn't going to do it anymore. The time had come to stop hiding in the shadows, to stop being the person who always put everyone else first. I stood there, in that room filled with voices that didn't notice me, and, for the first time in a long time, I knew I had to make a change. I wasn't going to stay in the background any longer. I wasn't going to keep being the person who silently carried everything for everyone else. It was time to take a stand. I left the family gathering that night with a sense of determination that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I was going to make them see me. And when they did, they would know who I really was. Someone who had carried the weight for so long, but was no longer willing to bear it alone. No more silence. No more staying in the shadows. I had given enough. Now, it was time for me to take what was mine. I walked into the room with a different sense of purpose this time. The air was the same, heavy with laughter and casual conversations. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning in it. This time, I wasn't the one, sitting quietly in the corner, pretending to be okay with being invisible. I was here for something else, something bigger. I had let the family believe that they were the ones in control, that they held the power. But the truth was, I had always held it, and today, they were going to see it. The family was gathered around the dinner table, just like always. They were talking about their usual nonsense, gossiping about people they hadn't seen in years, talking about the latest reality TV drama, laughing as if their lives were perfect. It had always been like this. They were living in their bubble, never once thinking about the person who was keeping them afloat. The person who had made it all happen, who had worked behind the scenes, building the foundation that they took for granted. And they still didn't know. They had no idea what was coming. I stood there for a moment, watching them, feeling the old familiar sting of being overlooked. It was almost like a reflex, feeling like I didn't belong, like I was the outsider. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to shrink back. I wasn't going to let them see me as the lazy person they had branded me as. I wasn't going to play that part anymore. I walked up to the front of the room, my steps purposeful, steady. They turned to look at me, their expressions puzzled. For a second, I felt the weight of their eyes on me, the judgment, the disbelief. But I didn't flinch. I didn't let them see how much it had hurt. I knew exactly what I was doing. "You've all been wondering who's been holding this business together," I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through the noise of their conversations. "Well, it's me. I've been the one working behind the scenes, keeping things running. And now it's time for you to see it." They stared at me, confused, unsure of whether they'd heard me correctly. But the confusion quickly turned to realization as I pulled out a folder from my bag and placed it on the table in front of them. The folder was thick, packed with contracts, agreements, and financial documents. It was the proof, the evidence of everything I had done for them, everything I had been silently doing for years. "You thought it was just your hard work," I continued, looking each one of them in the eye. "You thought this business was all because of you. But I've been funding it, supporting it, making sure it didn't collapse under the weight of your mistakes. I've been the one ensuring that this family stays afloat, and you never once thought to appreciate it." They sat in stunned silence as I laid it all out for them. The numbers, the investments, the contracts, all of it. They had no idea. They had no idea that while they had been living their lives, thinking everything was handed to them, I had been the one making sure they had everything they needed. It wasn't the glamorous job. It wasn't the attention-grabbing work. But it was the necessary work, the work that kept everything going. As I spoke, I could see their expressions change. First, it was disbelief, then confusion, and then understanding. Slowly, they began to realize the truth. They began to understand how much I had been giving, how much I had sacrificed without ever asking for anything in return. They saw how wrong they had been to dismiss me, to treat me like I was the lazy one, the one who had nothing to contribute. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched them squirm in their seats, unsure of what to say. They had spent so many years believing they were the ones in control, that their success was all because of their hard work. But now, the truth was right in front of them. They couldn't deny it anymore. Finally, it was my older brother who broke the silence. He looked at me, his face pale, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Regret. "Maya, we didn't know," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You didn't know," I echoed, my voice steady, "because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to look. You never saw me." I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I had already moved past that. I had already realized that I didn't need their validation, their approval, to feel worthy. I had already accepted that I was more than they had ever thought I was. But now, they were going to see it. They were going to see the truth, the one they had so carefully ignored for all these years. As I stood there, watching them process everything, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had been invisible for too long. But not anymore. Now, I was finally seen. Now, they knew exactly who I was, and it was time for me to take what I had earned. "I'm done hiding," I said, my voice filled with quiet power. "I've been the one holding everything together. Now it's time for me to stand in the light. I'm not the lazy one. I'm the one who made this happen." With that, I turned and walked away from the table, leaving them to digest the truth. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their acknowledgement. I had already given myself the recognition I deserved. I had already claimed my power. Now, it was time for them to realize just how wrong they had been.